going to speak on the fundamentals of CPM scheduling for construction project managers. Thank you very much for joining us today. I think that this is a very useful course. We offer courses every Tuesday at the same time. So if there's any interest in getting into our other courses, feel free to sign up through our site under the Resources tab. We've got things on data management, claims management, delay analysis, and obviously CPM scheduling. Before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the original founder of a company called Construct Solutions. This is a construction consulting firm that is also a technology firm. We've created a technology called Smart PM. It helps people capture and study data. It actually analyzes data for you as long as you capture it. I've got 15 years of advisory experience in the commercial construction industry. I've been working at companies like Deloitte and KPMG prior to founding my own firm. But mostly what I did was help people in commercial construction on project controls, data analytics, risk management, dispute avoidance, dispute resolution, all these sort of things, just helping people ultimately optimize and maximize profits in construction. I am a certified planning and scheduling professional, certified cost engineer through the AACE. I'm on the board of building construction at Georgia Tech. So I've got a lot of experience in construction. As I said, today we're talking about scheduling in construction, and this is geared towards project managers. Now, if there are any questions throughout this, feel free to ask. I have a screen up here that will show me your question, and I will find a good stopping point to answer that question. Also, if you want to remove the screen, this pop-up from GoToMeeting, there's a little orange arrow in the upper left corner. You can click on that, and it will minimize the screen so you can see the entire screen. The objectives of this course, first I'm going to talk about CPM scheduling, critical path method scheduling, from a very high basic level. I know some people on this call may be very familiar with CPM scheduling, but some people may not. So I'm going to talk about what is critical path method scheduling, why is it important in construction. The next thing I'm going to talk about is baseline schedules, generating that baseline. What are some best practices for creating good, strong schedules? Next is updating these schedules. Once you have your baseline, once you start managing your project with this schedule, what do you do to update it? What are best practices there? And this is all based on my experience, based on a lot of the people that I've worked with, giving them good pointers on sound schedules, watching pitfalls and avoiding them. I'll explain all this throughout the process. And then we're going to talk a little bit about lean construction planning, which involves scheduling, obviously. But I want to give you a high-level overview of what this lean construction terminology is. So that's what we'll conclude with. So let's get started. First of all, critical path method. That's what CPM stands for. Basically, what critical path method scheduling is a technology. It's an algorithm within a software that ultimately takes your activities, assigns calendars, assigns durations, calendars. You can assign resources, but ultimately, most importantly, is the duration, is the calendar that it's sitting on. What days can you work? What days can you not? Usually, a 5-day-per-week calendar is pretty normal. A 6-day-a-week calendar is common too. But ultimately, assigning logic is really where this becomes important. Once you have a duration and once you have logic, these logical relationships are really what the algorithm takes and presents to you a critical path method schedule. So what you do is you add your logic ties. You say that some activities can't start until other activities are complete. Some activities can't finish until other activities are complete. You take all your various logic ties. You put all your activities into the program, you tie them together, you hit schedule, and what it does is create what's called a CPM schedule. And obviously, we're going to talk a lot about this today, but the reason they call it critical path method scheduling is because this program ultimately takes all these relationships and constraints that you put into the program, and it calculates for you the start dates and finish dates of all the various activities in the order in which you've presented them through logic. There is one path on this critical path method schedule that's called the critical path. This is the one and only path of activities that extends from the beginning of the job to the end of the job, meaning all these activities have really no room for delay, and that's why they call it the critical path. It is critical that you get these activities done in the time frames that you placed on them, the durations, and ultimately in this order. And any delays that exist on that path will push out the end date of the job. And this is very important in construction. We know this because end dates being delayed costs a lot of money and starts a lot of arguments as to who ultimately caused this delay. So the focus of these critical path method schedules is to focus on, first and foremost, that critical path. Make sure, come hell or high water, that these set of activities are done in accordance with the plan. But what happens to all the other activities? They actually have this thing called float. Float is ultimately room for delay. If, for example, a series of activities doesn't extend to the end of the job, it extends to about a month before the end of the job, you have a month of float. Those activities can be delayed for a full month before the end date of the job is impacted. And I will show you a little bit more visuals about what I'm talking about, but that's really what critical path method scheduling is. It's a calculation. It's a calculation based on logical restraints that you place into a schedule. Why are these useful? It helps people manage. It helps people manage their resources and time frames that they've agreed to in a contract. It helps people visualize what is the most important activities right now to get done so that the end date of this job is not delayed. One very important point that I'd like to make is I've worked with a lot of contractors. I've worked with a lot of trade contractors. Some people like to do their schedules in Excel and Visio. These are not CPM. These are drawings. One of the most useful parts about the CPM schedule is that when you perform an update and you status the various activities in your schedule, then it will actually produce a new critical path potentially. It will give you a new end date if things are delayed. So any activities that are delayed up until that point will push out all other follow-on activities, and all the activities that are complete up until that point, all follow-on activities kind of line up in suit. And that's why it's important. You have a flow. You have a flow of activities. You've incorporated that into this program. And what this program does for you is constantly keep you informed of where do you stand when you update it and what's to come next based on what our original plan was. Now, Excel doesn't allow you to do that. Visio doesn't allow you to do that. But these programs do allow you to do that, and that's why it's useful. Here's an example of what the critical path is. You see this red line here. As you can see, this activity extends from the beginning of the job, this red line, all the way to the end of the job. And as you can see, these activities are dependent upon one another. And if any of these are delayed, if say this parking foundation was delayed a month, this end date would push out a month. A lot of these other things would push out a month too, but it wouldn't impact the end date as much as the items on the critical path. And back to what we were talking about before, this concept of float. This is actually a project that I had worked on a few months ago. It was a dormitory with lots of buildings, parking garage, some site work. But you can see here that Building C, it was planned to get done by March 7th. Pretty much once we got through framing, it was kind of on its own little path. Interior finishes would ensue, and it would get done by March 7th. Now, if that was done on April 7th, it wouldn't delay the end date of the job, assuming everything else went to plan. It wouldn't delay the end date of the job until it had consumed that month and a half of what we call float. So this is just a good example of a summarized schedule that shows us, that there is a critical path, and anything on that critical path anything delayed on that critical path will push the end date out. And that's really the whole idea of seeing what a critical path is. But more importantly, these schedules not only tell you that, but they also tell you when you're supposed to be working on other areas, and it helps you manage your crews if you're working on multiple areas. For instance, here's a very good example. The way that this project went was they were going to demo and excavate the site. Once they got done with that, they had some finished work around the site, but that's when they were going to put in their parking foundation. This parking foundation was right in the center of the site, so they wanted to get that in first. It was a big concrete structure, so that's where the concrete sub would go, spend 2.5 months on the concrete structure, at which point these 5 buildings, once that was complete, these 5 buildings, their concrete pads would be installed, their foundations, all simultaneously. So the plan was to basically, within the next month after that, put all these building pads down, and then framing could start. And the way that they were going to start framing, as you can see, looks like they were going to have 2 crews. They were going to have a crew on Building D. They were going to have a crew on Building C. Once the crew finished on building C, that first crew, it would go into A, B, and then E. And the other crew, which was working in building D, which was a bigger building, and building F was another bigger building, that crew would move from building D to F. So you can see that there was multiple crews that were necessary to do framing. And then all the interior finishes work would ensue. And throughout these schedules, I haven't shown it in this summary because this summary was generally done to kind of paint a picture for people to understand the schedule. But there are logic ties between interior finishes and that sort of thing. But ultimately, this is what you use. And now if I updated this schedule to say May, and I still wasn't done with demo and excavation, all these things would push out. The critical path would remain the same. All of these things would push out, say, a month, but the longest path, the critical path, would push out a month as well. And that would ultimately tell us what our new projected end date is, what work still needs to be completed, and in what order. And that's the value of these scheduling programs. If I just took this in Excel and I wanted to update that, it would be really hard on a regular basis to update all the activities to hold the relational constraints throughout the program and recalculate finish dates. I'd have to do that all by hand, and that's what the programs are best for, is actually automatically calculating that. I have a question. Would the recording be available? Yes, I am recording this, and I will make it available. I have to download it. I have to then put it on YouTube, but I'll make it available to the people who are on this call today. The basics of CPM scheduling terminology, this is very, very basic, clearly, but an activity. This is the building block of a schedule. Every schedule needs activities. So every little task in construction for your project, you need to think about, what are all the tasks that are necessary to get this building or construction project from a hole in the ground to an actual structure or asset. There can be any number of activities. There can be long activities. There can be short activities. But everything needs to have a duration and a certain title. For instance, pouring the foundation, or putting concrete on level 1, or putting in windows on level 1. These are activities. And generally speaking, when people produce a schedule, they have to give it a planned duration. Each one of these activities has to have a number of days for which they believe that the activity is going to take. And this ultimately has to take into account resource estimates. Say we're putting a foundation in and we need it to get done in 10 days. We will decide how many people are necessary to do that, or vice versa. If we know that we can get up to 20 people on the site maximum, then you can estimate your duration based on that. So these are the things that you need to think about when producing a schedule. Is you create an activity, you give it a duration, and then you can give it a resource estimate to reach that duration. Milestone is a significant point in time that a schedule has. It's not an activity, it's just a milestone. It's just a point that the activities all lead up to or begin with. So like notice to proceed is a milestone. Watertight is a milestone. Completion is a milestone. Substantial completion. These are all points in which you want to measure against. And a lot of times in contracts, it's required that you have certain milestones to measure against because that's how liquidated damages are assessed. So you need to put those into your schedule. Logical relationship is the tie. It's the tie in which two activities are connected to one another if they are. And there's two ways for an activity to be connected to another. It's whether it's a predecessor or successor. If I'm an activity that has a predecessor, then that means before I can either start or get finished, the predecessor of mine needs to get finished or started or be finished as well. Successors, same thing. It's just the opposite. If I'm an activity and I have a successor, that means that successor activity cannot start until I am done or have already started or finished, that sort of thing. And then we talked about float before. Once you put all this information in, once you put your activities in, you give them durations, you give them resources, you tie them logically, find the activities that are logically related, and you connect them with those relationships. You hit schedule, and a schedule presents itself in the order in which you've assigned activities. It automatically calculates it for you, and then some of these activities will have what's called float. That means they don't have to happen. They don't have to start or finish on the days in which the schedule says that they're starting or finish. It basically says this this activity has a certain number of days that it can be delayed before impacting the end date of the job, and that's what we call float. Basics, building a CPM schedule. First things first is you got to choose a technology. I think everybody's heard of Primavera. Everybody's heard of Microsoft. There's some other companies out there. As a matter of fact, our company's even built our own CPM scheduling technology. We call it free CPM. It's a free online CPM technology at www.freecpm.com. Once you choose this method, this technology, you need to sit down and discuss with either yourself or other people involved in the project, what are all the activities that are necessary to build this job? And this could be anywhere between 100, 1,000, 20,000 tasks. I've seen schedules in the 80,000 range, which I think is a little unnecessary, but some people don't. But you need to sit down there and really conceptualize the project and figure out what's the order in which activities are going to need to be built, what are these activities, what are the durations, and you list them out. Like I just said, once you list out all the activities, you got to set a duration. I like to risk adjust these. Generally speaking, a lot of the activities that I see in schedules are best case scenarios. They align with a hope that we can get this done in 10 days. I'm sure we can, but sometimes not a reality. I say risk adjust this to account for anything that could delay that activity. For instance, a design change or an RFI or weather or not enough resources or poor performance, little things that could impact the duration you should account for when you set these durations. Next thing you do is you apply the necessary relationships. Once you have your activities and you set these durations, now you got to look at each activity separately and say what has to be done before this and what can get done after. And that allows you to set your predecessors and successors. And once you do that, you're able to apply any constraints. There's other things too, like not necessarily related to logic, but there's certain items throughout your schedule that you may decide can't start for whatever reason, unrelated to any other activity in a schedule. And you can be setting these constraints. You can set calendars. You can set crews. Calendars is another type of constraint where you can basically say, I'm only allowed to work 3 days a week on this particular activity because maybe a sub has 2 projects going, not enough resources, or they just want to work 3 days. Then there's crew constraints. Once you start seeing activities kind of lining up, say, you have a lot of electrical activities going on at the same time, you have to start to think about, are we going to be able to get enough people? And if that's going to factor into this, you need to come up with a crew restraint or crew constraint that basically ties activities together as well. And then there's various date constraints. So once you place all this information into your program, you hit schedule, and it produces your schedule. One of the other recommended best practices that I recommend to anybody who's getting involved in scheduling, and in addition to listing all your activities and assigning them relationships and hitting schedule, it'd be nice to put some sort of organizational structure around each one of these activities, to kind of enable somebody to study the schedule in different ways. In Primavera, we call this activity codes. You can assign a building, you can assign a level, a location, a trade, and it allows you to kind of sort and filter your schedule in different ways so you can kind of segregate certain things together in a certain manner that kind of tells the story better as to the flow of this job. It allows you to better visualize what's supposed to happen and in what order. The other thing that I highly recommend is resource loading and cost loading these activities. Every one of these activities, to me, represents a potential impact. I come from a world of helping people do delay analysis and study budget overruns, and it makes it really hard if you don't have a plan. If you have just a bottom line number for your contract and you know that there's going to be people out there working in this order, you just don't know how many people are working on that you intend to have working on each activity and what that's supposed to cost with equipment and material and everything. You don't have a basis for comparison. And when you start being impacted and you don't have that basis for comparison, then you don't really truly know why you were impacted. You can't prove it either. It makes it very hard without that basis to prove to the owner or to your CM or to your GC if you're a trade contractor why you're over budget or delayed because you never had a basis. The only basis you have is a duration, and this really could ultimately affect profit margins. So I highly recommend resource and cost loading activities. You know, a lot of the people that I talk to out there in construction, when I bring that up, the resource and cost loading of activities, they look at me like I'm crazy because that's going to take time. It's going to take time once for a few hours if you just want to sit down and drill through it, and it's going to save you a lot of money if you do it. So I highly recommend it. Basics of preparing the activity list. How do you come up with these activities? The first thing is you have to include all activities to complete the work, obviously a no-brainer. This includes discussions. The people who you need to discuss with obviously are project managers, superintendents, subcontractors. Getting that subcontractor schedule submission is useful so that you can begin to list everything that needs to be done. One of the rules of thumb that I follow, and I continue to want to follow, is you don't want to have 60-day activities and you don't want to have a bunch of one-day activities. The sweet spot is anywhere between 5 and 20 days, which basically translates to between a week and a month. I often see activities with 2-3-day durations. The more you can lump these things together, the easier the schedule is. And the reason that I say this is, as I said before, I've seen schedules with thousands upon thousands of activities. I looked at a schedule a couple weeks ago, and it was, I don't know, 30,000 activities spread across 20 interrelated schedules. And I just couldn't believe, and it wasn't even for that large of a project, and I couldn't believe the effort that had gone into not only creating that schedule and managing that schedule, because what I saw is it was so complicated that the people in the field didn't want to even pay attention to it, nor could they even access it because they didn't have Primavera, so it was just almost an academic drill that was getting updated and taking a lot of time to update. So I think that you don't want to exceed 2,000 activities. Now, there are cases where you need to, big mega projects, but do your best, in my opinion, to keep those activities at a minimum, because we all know how construction is. It's a very time-constrained process. When you have schedules that big, you're going to have to hire a scheduling consultant because it just becomes too hard to manage. And then once you do that, you're taking the reins out of the project managers and the subcontractors and the superintendent's hands, and you're giving it to somebody who's ultimately may or may not know much about construction. But that's not to say that all schedulers don't know much about construction. I've met some very, very smart and talented schedulers. I think that the most important piece when you have a schedule consultant is to coordinate with them, to communicate with them, to collaborate, to discuss, all project managers, superintendents, and that sort of thing. Another recommendation that I have is generally each trade, try to keep to about 100 activities. This is easier for the subcontractors to digest. It's very important that subcontractors are on the same page. The last thing anybody wants on any side of the contract is inefficiencies. And once things start getting a little bit more complicated, you'll start to see crews spreading and confusion, and that just results in trade stacking too. That just results in inefficiencies. I've studied inefficiencies, and I know for a fact that that happens. And it's a lot of times it's due to just a misunderstanding around the schedule. So the more simple you make these things, the better off for everybody involved. Again, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you need more activities. It's at that point, it's a process of making sure that people are all on the same page on a constant basis. Crews and/or process is very important. It's very important to think about how we're going to manage these crews. How many crews are there going to be, and how many people are in a crew? That's very important for determining your activity list and the order in which they're going to go. You have to have an achievable crew size. You always, I've seen projects where they would need 100 electricians, but they can only get 30, and at the end of the day, they're scratching their head as to why they were so late. The fact is, you just didn't have enough resources based on the plan to progress in the time frames that you put together. And that's really that needs to be thought out is what's the achievable crew sizes for each trade over what period of time? How are we going to disperse these people across the site? And that begins to allow you to better understand which activities, but more importantly, what are the durations and what's the logic in which we're going to build this project. Resources is very important. So in terms of the activity durations, I think this is the same point I just made. You need to consider the number of resources required to reach a duration. A lot of times people want to give a best case duration. How many days can we get this activity done in? You have to visualize the space. You have to think about, okay, if we want to get it done in 10 days, how many people is that going to require, and do we think that that's achievable? And there's a couple different things to think about in that decision point of whether or not it's achievable. First of all, is what is the market going to allow us to get to our site? Are there going to be any other activities or similar trades going on, or similar activities with the same trade contractor going on at the same point? And the other more important piece is how many people can we fit in a given area? You have to think about these things when you're starting to put together durations. You have to start to visualize the actual workers sitting out there, or else it's just a very arbitrary number. So once you get through that, you create your first draft. You create your first draft of your CPM schedule. I think you review your CPM schedule and modify durations to account for risk. This is once you actually put in logic. You put in your durations, you put in your logic, you run it, and then you have to start to look to see if there's any risk items going on. You can see crew restraints. You can look for trade stacking. You need to start thinking about what issues could arise once we have our schedule put together, and you can tweak. You can tweak durations. You can tweak logic to ultimately begin to overcome these risk items. Other risk items that exist are, upfront changes, upfront RFIs, incompleteness of drawings, weather in the winter. Where are we located? If we're in Toronto, does it get freezing cold, and do we think that it's going to have an impact on some of our durations with concrete and that sort of stuff? Things that you need to think about. The more best case durations in your schedule, the higher the risk of budget overruns and delays. This is just what I've seen in experience. People who start to say that we can get a project done in 4 months, and the activities that lead up into that are very much best case durations. There's higher risk. It's clear. Construction is a heavily impacted industry. You have lots of people from lots of different places: engineers, owners, CMs, GCs, trade contractors. Every one of these people has different decisions that need to be made, and all have to be working in sync to ultimately not impact your plan. Your plan is going to be impacted, and it's going to be impacted a lot in construction. When you have best case durations, that means you will be impacted, and your schedule has not actually included a little bit of variance for these impacts, which means it's generally going to get more than likely that estimate will be blown in terms of budget and delay than if you did work in a little bit of risk, if you did work in a little bit of an extension of time on various activities that you considered had a little bit more of a band of error, room for error. And so that's what I recommend when you're creating a schedule. Always think about that. Think about the fact that we're not looking to get things done as quickly as possible, although we are, but we have to be realistic that sometimes things don't work out as planned, and we have to build that in. And obviously, when you do build that in, you have to see what it does to the ultimate schedule end date, and then tweak it, because obviously the contract will tell you when you have to get done, and you have to then go re-risk adjust it so that it fits. And that's generally how you estimate activities. Setting activity relationships. This is another way of setting up a schedule, obviously. Logic is very important. Without logic, there is no CPM schedule. It's about trade flow. It's about workflow. It's about deciding which activities come first and which ones follow in suit. And there's various relationships. There's the finish-to-start relationship. There's the start-to-start relationship. Finish to start is basically saying that I cannot start an activity till my predecessor is 100% complete. Start to start basically says I can't start an activity until my predecessor has started. And if it's a start-to-start relationship with a successor, it's as a predecessor. I cannot. My predecessor is not. My successor is not starting until I have started. It's just semantics there. Finish-to-finish relationship is similar to start-to-start, but it's basically the opposite. It says I cannot finish this activity until my predecessor is finished. So they can be working in tandem, but they ultimately cannot get done until that's done. So actually, let me give you a few examples of a finish-to-start relationship. I cannot begin putting in drywall until my windows are put in, because you don't want to get any of it wet. So until you're 100% watertight, you will not start putting drywall in. So that would be a finish to start. The windows would be the predecessor to drywall, and once windows were 100% complete on a given floor or in a given building, then you would start drywall. Same thing with roofs. I will not start putting drywall in until I am done putting on my roof. So that would be a finish to start tie. Another start to start tie, similarly, is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. Perfect example. You don't have to wait till mechanical is done to start electrical. You may want to, but you don't have to in a given room. And it also varies on the size of the room. If we're in a giant room, like an airport, like a main floor of an airport, and the activity is mechanical on this main floor that kind of covers a large space, you want your mechanical guys to get started, and then you want the electrical guys to follow shortly thereaafter. You don't want mechanical to get 100% done before electrical even starts. And that's just to add efficiencies to scheduling. Another example is paint and drywall. You don't have to wait until the room is done with drywall to start painting. You can start painting halfway through when someone's moving down the line, putting up drywall, taping, and finishing it. Painters can come by right after. It just has to follow kind of closely behind. So that would be a start to start, and similarly a finish to finish with paint and drywall. I am not going to finish painting until my drywall is up. Painting will not ever get done before drywall, and that's what's a finish to finish tie. Lag is essentially it's giving this relationship a little bit of room. For instance, lag on a start-to-start tie is basic. It's saying like a lag of 2 would say I do not start my drywall or painting until 2 days after I started my drywall. And that's how you allow people to follow in suit. And these lags are based on how many days that you think is necessary to finish or start after the predecessor has started or finished. Generally speaking, in a schedule, every single activity should have a predecessor or successor, except for the first and last activities. They should not have a predecessor. The first activity doesn't need a predecessor because there's nothing that's kicking it off. And the last activity or milestone does not have a successor because it's the last one. But generally speaking, best practices in CPM scheduling is to ensure that every single activity has a predecessor or successor. A lot of times I've seen people not put predecessor or successors in there on some activities just because they don't know what one would be, they haven't thought about it, or they think that the simple way is to just put a constraint on. So if I say, I don't know what's preceding this concrete work on level 1, but I do want it to start on a certain day, that is actually that's taking out what the most, I guess, positive point of a CPM schedule is assigning this logic so it calculates for you when things should get done. If you're arbitrarily deciding that, you're not letting the schedule do its work. Now, it's not to say that there aren't circumstances where that's necessary, and I'll talk about them in a little bit, but ultimately the goal is to have as few activities without predecessors and successors, both of them, as possible. Right here we'll talk about relationships. I want to just show you examples of these relationship types. We'll first start talking about finish to start. As I said before, this is a finish to start tie. I cannot start this activity until my predecessor is finished. This would be a lag of 0. It would say that the moment that this gets done, I'm going to start my other activity. This is very common in construction, particularly on the baseline schedules. A finish to start tie with a lag of 2 basically says I am not going to start my successor until 2 days after my predecessor. And this could happen for any number of reasons. One of the more common ones is curing of concrete. You would have a lag of a couple days. You'd say I installed my concrete and I poured it, and then it had to dry for a number of days. Sometimes people put activities in for curing. Sometimes they just put lag. Lag can be put in for many different reasons on a finish to start time. And then here's another one. This is a predecessor-successor relationship, finish to start with a lag of negative 2 days. This actually tells me that these activities tie together in a finish to start capacity, but I am actually able to start my successor 2 days before the predecessor finishes, and I want to do that to speed things up. This is somewhat common. Different people argue different things, whether or not this will mess with float or is not accurate. Any number of reasons people may disagree with it. I don't really see a problem with this. I certainly see many activities, particularly longer activities. If say we've got a 10 or 15-day activity of pouring concrete or installing windows, something behind that could happen 2 days before it finishes, and you know that, and you should set that up that way. I don't really see a problem, but I will talk about negative lags that I do see a problem with, and that's right here. Start to start. We have a start to start lag of 0. That means I can start my successor the day that I start my predecessor. Pretty straightforward. Start to start. Lag 2 is basically what we just talked about when, if I want to start my painting 2 days after I start putting in my drywall, or if I want to start installing electrical 2 days after I start putting in plumbing or HVAC, this little bit of a lag is just releasing the crews ahead and hoping that things will follow suit and be as efficient as possible. This comes at a little bit of a risk, the shorter the lag when you're putting in multiple trades, because if the predecessor's slow and the successor's following, they're going to get jammed up as soon as that predecessor stops. So you need to think about that. Now this lag negative 2, my successor can start 2 days before my predecessor. That to me is incorrect. It's not set up correctly. This should be the predecessor with a lag of positive 2, because ultimately it is. It's happening before. So I think when people do these types of logic ties, that's not too strong. I say that this is not recommended. Next is finish to finish. Very similar to start, as you can see. Finish to finish tie on the same day with a lag 0 basically says I'm going to finish these 2 activities at the same time. You might even put paint and drywall in that category. Paint can easily catch up to drywall if you want to get them done on the same day. A lot of times you see these types of ties towards the end of a job when people are really scrambling to get things done. Then there's the predecessor, the finish to finish with a lag of 2. Very common, more common than this one, where you're basically saying the same thing you did with start to start, but you're not going to get done until 2 days after your predecessor is done. And this is basically the same. Generally speaking, it depends on durations, but I have also seen activities that are tied together with a start-to-start lag 2 and a finish-to-finish lag 2, which is ultimately, you might as well combine those 2 activities and call them a combination of the 2 activity names. But for purposes of managing trade flow, it's a useful thing to do, and I believe that this positive lag is a useful thing to do. Similarly with this negative 2 lag, I don't really understand why anybody would do this. It might as well be called a start-to-start tie. You're calling it a finish-to-finish with negative 2. I don't see the value in this, but still, to each their own. The whole goal is just to keep people on the same page as to what they're supposed to be working on in what order. And if this works for you, then by all means. I just don't think it's very practical. Understanding constraints. There's constraints that people put in to schedules nonetheless. I know we talked about having start dates, predecessors and successors for all your activities, but generally speaking, there are certain times where you would prefer to put in a constraint, and it could happen in your baseline, or it could happen throughout the progression of the work based on what you know at the time. There's different types. There's the mandatory start. This means this activity has to start today or on a specific day. It's not going to start before. It's not going to start after. The mandatory finish is similar. This is what ultimately will dictate float numbers. If you get done later than it can still get done later if it's updated, but ultimately it's saying I want this activity to finish on this date, and then it gets a total float of 0, unless it's getting done beforehand based on the logic. The start on or after, it means we can either start on or after. Start on or before means I can start on or before. These are various constraint types that are in Primavera, and some of which may be in Microsoft. But it ultimately is giving an activity some sort of requirement as opposed to what's just logically dictated through the relationships that tie it. Examples of start-finish constraints, availability of areas, or for instance, if I don't want to start concrete until the spring, that would actually constitute a calendar constraint, but similar, it would be I do not start until the spring. That's an availability. Government requirements, sometimes at airports or any other projects, the government may require certain activities start on a certain day or later or before. Contractual requirements. And then if there is activities that just don't have a predecessor or successor that you could even think of, but around the time that it's supposed to get done, and you prefer to put in a constraint, a start and finish constraint, you can do that. Other constraints is crew management. There's crew leveling capabilities in these programs where if activities of a certain trade are stacking up on one another and they're resource loaded, the program will ultimately level these out so that you don't hit numbers that are unachievable. At the same time, you may want to put constraints or relationships in just because of this. You may want to say, okay, we're going to have 2 crews maximum. They're going to have 10 people maximum. We can't be working in 3 areas at the same time, so you have to start adding logic or constraints in there. And tray stacking, availability of the area. These are all things that require thinking about any restraints or constraints that you want to put into your schedule based on crews. And then calendar constraints. We talked about this briefly. There's seasonal constraints. There's union requirements, things that require that certain activities occur at a certain point in time. Concrete is a perfect example. I've seen some other stuff, out there in Seattle. You can't do underground drilling in water during certain seasons because of the various fish and the noise pollution that could affect them. So that's another seasonal constraint. But generally speaking, constraints is an opportunity in the schedule to kind of manipulate or control when certain things happen and not take not incorporate any relationships amongst the activities. It's just another way of setting a date in a schedule. Yes, I got a question here. Will there be a continuous professional development certificate issued? Yes, if you're in, we have accredited this course for the AACE. We will give a professional development certificate after this. Just got to let me know. Whoever wants this, just email me, and I will make sure that you get your certificate. At this point, if there's any other questions, please let me know. I think we've covered a lot of ground on the basics of scheduling. Now we're going to start talking about, updating your schedule and preparing your baseline. Right now we're talking about updating. We've already talked about the baseline. But what is a schedule update? Oh, by the way, I just got another question, but I'll answer it shortly. What is a schedule update? Well, we just talked about preparing the baseline. We've sat down. We've come up with all the activities that we've decided we're going to be required to build this schedule or to build this project. We've put them into the schedule. We've assigned them durations. We've set logical ties. We've said what activities can't start until other ones are finished, which ones can't start until other ones are started, which ones can't finish until other ones are finished. We've decided all this stuff. We've maybe even resource loaded it. We've put in our activity codes. We've now hit schedule, and a baseline schedule has popped up in this program. The baseline is ultimately needs to be approved by both parties. From a delay analysis standpoint, it's very important that schedules are approved as the basis for managing the work. But what happens after that? You start building, and the schedule is not. It's still of use for the reasons that we talked about before. The fact is, we can update the schedule, and all this stuff, all these relationships, will continue to recalculate the start and finish dates based on the progress achieved over time. For example, if I've updated my schedule after a week or two or even a month, I've said which activities have started, which activities have finished, which activities are in process. The program's going to take all that into account, and then it's going to take the same logic and the remaining durations that are calculated on the activities that are still in flux, and it's going to recalculate your plan. And this could change your critical path, but more importantly, it just statuses the job to tell you, what's coming up next now that we've been doing this for a month. That's what a schedule update is. It's bringing your current plan to a point of now after you've started your work. Why is this useful? It's very useful because it keeps people on the same page. If you just produce a schedule and then you said, all right, guys, go do it, and we'll see you at the end of the job, no one would really know what to do after probably about a couple weeks. So it's good to status these. It's good to update them to a point in time so that you know at this point where are we at now and where do we go forward. And the other thing that happens in this point in time is changes can be made. Changes can be made based on what's going on in the field. Like I said before, construction is an industry that's very impacted by many, many different things. So that's essentially why it's very important to catch your schedule up to now, take a look at the project, take a look at the impacts to date. If there's been any delays, you can overcome them. You have to know why they happened. If you've been impacted elsewhere, you can begin to adjust durations to reflect actual, real-world durations that you're seeing on your job, and then it will ultimately may recalculate your critical path and that sort of thing. So it's very, very important and useful. If you are going to create a baseline schedule, it is worth the time to update it very regularly. I've got a couple questions here that I'll answer before I get going on more about schedule updating. What is the main difference between Primavera and Microsoft Project? Generally speaking, I mean, they take the same methodology. But first and foremost, Primavera is expensive. It's anywhere between $2,500 and $3,000 these days for a license, whereas I believe Microsoft Project is $1,000. Not that it's much different. $1,000 for a license for your computer these days is very expensive. In terms of it being harder or easier, I would say, to be honest with you, once you play around with a scheduling program, it's generally pretty straightforward once you learn, the fundamentals. The fundamentals are, how do I add an activity? How do I assign or create a calendar? How do I assign that calendar? How do I assign logic? And how do I hit, schedule? How is it going to produce a schedule for me? That's at the fundamental level, the value of CPM scheduling. But I would say that based on my understanding of both of those products, I've used both of them. I've studied both of them. I ultimately think that Microsoft is generally more straightforward. Primavera has a lot more bells and whistles. It has the ability to do a lot of different things. Now, another question I have is, what is the best way of understanding the use of filters? Very good question. Filters are basically allowing you to segregate a certain set of activities so that you can view them. When you put in a master schedule with 1,000 or 2,000 activities that have 20 various trades across 20 different floors. You have a big, huge mishmash of information. You can organize that. You can look at it based on building or floor or trade, however you want. That's one way to view it. But if you want to just look at a certain subset of activities with no noise around it, for instance, if you want to print out a subcontractor's particular work without showing the, we'll say we want to show the electrician just his activities, and we don't want him to have to sift through HVAC and plumbing and concrete or steel or drywall. We just want them to see their plan. You can do that through the filter. And that's really what I see as the value of filters, is segregating a certain subset of activities. If I just want to look at a certain building, or if I want to look at a certain level, or if I want to look at activities that are pre-construction as opposed to construction, or just closeout activities, you are able to do all that. As a matter of fact, you can say, I want to look at all the activities that have the word "the" in it, and it will allow you to do that. So there's many different ways to use filters, and I think that they're very useful, particularly for me. When I do a forensic analysis, I have to study every schedule in great detail, but at the same time, it's from a management perspective, it's about giving the user the ability to see a certain subset of activities without a ton of noise. One of the challenges for any of these programs is once you get hundreds, if not thousands, of activities in them, the people who are actually doing the work generally don't have Microsoft Project or Primavera, and if they're going to view any schedule, it's going to be a big, thick paper copy. So filters come into handy there if you want to do filter down to the next 3 weeks of work, or if you want to filter down to a certain trade. It makes it a lot more manageable for them to view these. Another question I have is, what does Primavera have that Project lacks? Well, there's a lot of different things. I'd like to answer this offline and walk you through the actual program, but it has. Yeah, I haven't studied this in detail. I just know that Primavera, I've seen, has a lot more bells and whistles as opposed to Microsoft Project. Microsoft Project is essentially pretty straightforward scheduling program that really focuses on the scheduling aspect. Primavera has a lot more abilities to view certain graphs and that sort of stuff. But if you want to talk about that offline, feel free to email me or shoot me a call, and we can set up a time, and I'll walk you through both products. I have them both on my computer, and I can show you my screen, obviously. One of the other questions I have here is, how do we know which activities are driving the project? Well, first of all, driving means there's two ways to be driving. Now, driving the project, that sounds to me like you're talking about the critical path, driving the end date of the project. That's the critical path. That are things with zero float. Those are things that are generally red in your schedule. What these programs do point out is it allows you to do whatever colors you want, but the default settings show the critical path is red. They are driving the end date of the job. Any activity on the critical path, if delayed, will push out the end date of the job. They are ultimately the reason that the end date is the end date of the job, things on the critical path. Now, there's also driving relationships. It doesn't have to be driving the end of the job. But for instance, if I have two activities, I'll give you an example. I have two activities that are essentially ongoing at the same time. We'll say that we're putting in concrete in two buildings, right? Or we'll even say, I'll make this even easier. I'm putting two concrete columns together, one that's going to take 5 days and one that's going to take 10. And once they're done, I'm going to connect them with another concrete column. So both of those activities are essentially driving the start of the following activity. They both have to be done before I can start the following activity. But since one is taking 5 days and the other one's taking 10, the 10-day activity is ultimately the activity that is dictating the start of that follow-on activity that's going to connect these two columns, whereas this first one that takes 5 days, it'll get done in 5 days and then it'll wait 5 days. So it's actually not the driving activity for producing the actual estimated start date or finish date for a successor. So So that's what a driving activity is. It's something that ultimately, if there's multiple logic ties going in to a activity, if I'm an activity that is a successor and 4 things need to happen before I start, the one that ultimately is the longest and ultimately dictates my start date, and all the rest have float, the one that has no float, and that's called free float, is my driving activity. So back to schedule updates. Recommended practices. Let's see. Recommended scheduling updating processes. Now, let me back up a second. One of the hardest things to do is, I would say, accurately update a schedule and then produce a plan that exists, that is actually feasible going forward. You know, unless you don't change anything and you believe that your baseline was feasible. Now, I've seen many a time where schedulers or project managers update their schedule. They realize that they're impacted. They realize that the critical path has been delayed, that the project's now estimated to be complete on a different day, like a half a month later or a month later than the plan, and they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to believe it. They don't want the owner to know about it. They just think that they need to somehow do something to make sure that that doesn't that end date comes back in. Now, that something is very important. You either do something that's impossible or you do something that's possible and agreed to. And you also have to take into account what's going to cost more money. If you're going to start removing logic and shortening durations, that's called acceleration. That's called compression. That can cost money, and it can cost a lot of money, and it can also get to a point where it's impossible. If you do that for 3 months in a row, your schedule is at a point where it's probably not likely going to happen unless you spend a ton more money. So schedule updating is a very important thing, but it needs to be very, people need to put a lot of thought into it. And I've seen in a lot of the projects that I worked on that sometimes not a lot of thought's put into it, and that's where they end up in my hands as a consultant, because I'm coming up at the end of the day to tell them why everything happened and what the cost was and who's responsible. And it starts with poor updating practices. So the way that you actually update schedules, the correct way, is to first, you know, whether you're a scheduler or a project manager, you need to sit down and discuss the status of the job at that point in time. You need to figure out which activities started, which activities finished, what were those dates, which activities are actually ongoing right now, what % complete are they. Once you do that, you then go, the scheduler or the project manager, whoever's managing that schedule, goes and updates this information based on that, based on, you know, what are the start dates, finish dates of all activities that are complete, what other activities are started or are in process, and what % complete are they, and that's called statusing the schedule. You hit schedule after that, and this is the point where rubber hits the road. You see here that maybe there's a delay, maybe there's not. If there's not, you just keep moving forward. More often than not, because I know about impacts and a lot, this happens every month over month, things get impacted and dates get pushed out, that needs to start to be discussed. This is the point where sometimes I see people take matters into their own hands, shorten a few durations, remove a few ties, all looks good now, the project's no longer delayed. That is the point in time where I think it's more important to discuss these changes with project management, other supers and subcontractors. You know, if things get delayed, more often than not, somebody's going to have some ideas to mitigate that delay, and hopefully those ideas are not costly. It's about figuring out the best approach, and that the people doing the actual work are the ones that you need to discuss this with. So that I highly recommend that at this point in time, if schedule updates are delayed, you discuss it with people, and you ultimately have meetings and mitigation meetings with the site team to figure out the best approach to overcome this delay that everybody's on board with, not just haphazardly making changes and hoping that everybody's on board with it. And then the other thing is updating your schedule based on the knowledge known. First, you want to update it based on the information that you've just learned from the people on the team, the strategies that you've just built. But the other thing that you need to do is start to adjust durations based on what you've seen to date. One very relevant example: say that you have a 20-story building, and every level is concrete being poured, and it's going to take. You originally thought it was going to take 10 days to pour each floor, and then go on to the next, and then go on to the next. So that's a total of 200 days. Say what you realized after the first month, or the first 2 months, is every one of them's taken 15 or 20 days. Now, if you keep concrete at 10 days in your schedule without changing a thing, chances are you are going to be significantly delayed, but your schedule is not telling you at that point. So you either do one of two things. You get more people there, you figure out what's happening here to cause this problem, and you fix it, or you adjust your schedule going forward to give you an accurate accounting of probably what's going to happen, because that will allow you to ultimately see the real critical path. So one of the things that I tell people constantly is you need to be capturing and studying data, studying it on a regular basis as it relates to performance on your schedule. And this could be durations, it could be manpower, it could be productivity. This information should be studied at least at a very high level. And I know that that's a hard thing to do in construction because there's a lot of things going on. People are resource constrained, but this information is very valuable. And as a matter of fact, next week we have a presentation on data management in construction where I will talk to people about how do you do this process. It's about looking at your daily reports. It's about taking out very relevant information, kind of overlaying it on your original plan, and then producing accurate assessments of what's being impacted, why is it happening, and what's going to do to the future of this job if things keep continuing, and then ultimately preparing strategies around that. I have a couple more comments. Somebody just joined. Yes, I will be sending out a recorded version. I have to upload it to YouTube, but I should have that done in the next couple days. I have another question. Is the last planner approach can be considered a schedule updating process? Well, kind of, but not really. Last planner is essentially like a lean construction approach. Now, it does require having an original plan, but it's certainly not your typical CPM scheduling process. Another question I have is, I need advice on ways to improve my scheduling skills. What do you suggest? We don't utilize much of it where I work. I want to improve myself for the future place of work. Why don't we just have a call? This particular webinar is about basics of scheduling. You can watch this video again after we're done, and it should give you an idea, but this is what I recommend you do. We created a site called freecpm.com. It allows you to ultimately schedule using a CPM methodology online. It doesn't cost any money. It's not the $1,000 that Microsoft charges or the $3,000 that Primavera charges. It's ultimately a scheduling software that you can utilize online. I would suggest you play around with it. I would suggest that you can study a lot of different things online. If you want to have a call with me after this, let's talk. I'll talk to you a little bit about any questions that you have regarding scheduling, best practices, and how to ultimately do it. But if you're talking about how do I open up a program and how do I actually do it, every one of these programs could be, I guess, downloaded. Ours is online and it's free, visible to everybody. You can practice in there, and I can walk you through it. Schedule updating do's and don'ts. This kind of aligns with what I was just talking about. There's things that you should do and there's things that you shouldn't. Status schedules in real time, that's a do. A don't is to issue a schedule a month or two later. I don't know what the point of this is. I've been on projects where there's been literally a pissing match between the owner and the contractor on the schedule as to what's the end date and how's it going to work, and they just keep sending it back and forth to each other to ultimately decide what's going to happen going forward, and it doesn't get approved for months. And by the time it's approved, the project's changed, and it's changed in a manner that didn't have a schedule. So any contractor out there, if you get to a point where the owner is not accepting your schedule, and I've been down the road of disputes, keep using your schedule. Let the owner do their little thing, but keep using your schedule. If they want to make some tweaks, yeah, you can discuss that, but up until that point where it's decided, manage the way that you need to manage and track that progress and document that schedule that you were using at the time. Because if it comes down to it at the end of the day and you're delayed and the owner's arguing with you that they told you to do it this way, and you just have to tell them what you did, and you have to make it, as long as it was logical and you weren't trying to lose money, which I don't think anybody is, it's very strong. It will withhold up in court. So, if you ever get put in that situation, just, play the game with the owner, but manage with your schedule that you believe you need to be managing with, or else you're just going to get in a little argument at the end of the day, too. Not just a little one, probably a big one. Update schedules on a regular basis. If you wait more than a month, you're risking delay that you won't overcome. A month is about as long as I would go for any construction project, to do a schedule update. A lot can happen in a month, and we all know it. If you don't stay on top of these happenings, once you get into the 2-month, 3-month range, then you start to lose sight. The sooner you update your schedule, the more you understand about impacts, and that's really important. The reason that I get brought into projects at the end of the day is a lot of times because people have no clue what's going on, and it's cost a lot of money. The more often you update your schedule, the more often you meet with your people to update your schedule, and you get it out to the people doing the work, the more in tune and the more in sync they will be, and that will drive down additional costs and unplanned costs and impacts and that sort of thing, because you just really know what's going on at that point. Modify the plan based on discussions. Now, I think that the people in the field, the subcontractors, the field superintendents, the foremen, and even the project managers, people who are in tune with the actual project and people who know construction should all be contributing to the discussion around modifications to the plan. Modifications happen if things get impacted or change orders are placed in, things that will push out the end date. You need to discuss this with people. Where do these things fit in? What's our mitigation strategy? The more people, the better chance of success, because you get to see different vantage points. You get to get different ideas. I suggest once a month when you're doing your update, if you're doing it a monthly or weekly or every 2 weeks, you at least sit down with people and start to ponder questions related to your update, particularly if you've updated it and it's pushed things out, or if you're adding a change order, or any number of things that are changing your schedule and you know it. You need to discuss ideas to ultimately bring that date back to where you want it to be. Adjust the plan based on historical performance. We talked about this. Once you realize that activities are taking longer than planned, and if they're consistent activities, perfect examples in a high-rise building, 40 floors of mechanical, electrical, plumbing, concrete, every floor is ultimately the same. If you start to see durations that are longer or shorter, you should incorporate that, and then at the point in which it's necessary. At the first point in which you know with certainty that things are ultimately going to take longer or shorter than planned, because that will ultimately give you the ability to have an accurate critical path. The critical path is only as good as the schedule. If I've got 1,000 activities that are strung together, and they're incorrectly strung together, or they've got differing durations that aren't accurate, my critical path could be incorrect, and I could be looking at a schedule that's telling me one thing, where in reality the real critical path is elsewhere, and the end date's getting pushed out without my knowledge. And I think things are fine, but in reality, you need to really start to think about that as you update schedules. Eventually, it will catch up to itself, but that may be too late. You may have lost too much time. So something to think about. Incorporate trade constraints when updating, resource and trade constraints. A lot of times I see schedules that aren't, crews are moving from one area to the next. And I'll go back to this this high-rise building idea that, once the mechanical guy gets done with floor 1, he moves to floor 2. And once he gets done with floor 2, he moves to floor 3. There may actually be 2 crews. They may be going 1, 2, and then 3, 4, and then 5, 6. Now, if you're not tying those logic ties in there and predecessors get delayed, what will happen is the schedule will then tell me that I can get 10 crews in there working on 10 floors at once. And that's just not likely. Generally speaking, it may or may not be likely, but generally from what I've seen, you can't get enough people to do that. So if you don't have those logical ties in that are taking into account where crews should be moving based on how many people you can get into your project at once based on the market or based on the size of the area, you're gonna risk some overlapping, some trade stacking, which is infeasible. And again, you're put in a situation where your schedule is telling you something that's not going to happen, and then you'll be surprised at the end of the day when you're delayed, as will the owner. Somebody will have spent more money. You may have tried to do it as best as you can, and you spread your crews way too thin, and productivity suffers, and that costs money, and then you have to accelerate. This is a wormhole here. If you don't have good logic to segregate crews out and incorporate the fact that there are crew restraints or crew constraints, then you're at risk of producing a schedule that really doesn't paint the accurate picture, and that's going to potentially bring you down the road of inefficiencies, budget overruns, delays, and we don't like that. No one in construction likes that because it ultimately puts you at risk of losing money, and it ultimately impacts your relationship with your client. So try to avoid that at all costs. When you are updating your schedule and you are making changes, I recommend that you document these changes. Documenting is everything. Why did I do this? And the whole reason to do this is because we know construction is a very impacted industry. We know that projects are more than likely going to be delayed often, and we know that budgets are going to be overrun. Just based on statistics, most projects have budget overruns. Most projects have delays. A significant portion end up in dispute. And you need to document things because of that. Document your changes to your schedule. If you don't do that, it can come back to haunt you. If you make a change and you don't know why, it's 2 years later and you don't recall why, or somebody who made these decisions is no longer there, you're at risk of the owner or whoever you're arguing with to say, you know what, I don't agree with that, and you never discussed it with me. I would perform a monthly delay analysis. I think this does take a little bit of time, but I think it's in everybody's best interest when they update a schedule to do a little, half-a-day drill of studying, what happened this past month. What you'd first do is just update your schedule, status it, look at the end date, see what happened, and figure out why that happened. Which activity was critical this past month? Which couple activities were critical this past month that ultimately pushed the end date out? Why did it happen? Far too many people don't look at that. They don't think about that. What they do is they respond to that. That's okay to try to respond to that. You have to respond to that. But there's another question: is why did it happen? If you don't know why it happened, you really can't respond to it. But more importantly, you can't explain it to anybody else in the event you lose money because of it, and it's not your fault. So it's worth it. Waiting till the end of the day to have a consultant parachute in and figure out for you why your project was delayed, it's not solving any problems. It's the only problem it's solving is maybe getting you some money back, but it's a lot harder road than if you were doing it yourself along the way for 2 reasons. One, you actually have a lot more information and memory at the time, and 2, it's a lot less cloudy. If you're doing it at the time, you know what's going on. It's a lot less cloudy. But more importantly, at this point in time, if you can understand why you're being impacted, 2 years ago, and you were responding to it then, you can actually navigate the future of this project a little bit more successfully just based on the knowledge that you gained at the time. So it's about understanding why things are happening throughout the job and not waiting until the end of the job to kind of recoup and determine why things happen. And generally speaking, I think that that's a pretty sound strategy, and it should make a lot of sense. The more you know now, the less you have to worry about later. And then I'd say produce 3-week look-ahead schedules. This is important to keep the people in the field on the same page and not have a whole stack of papers to look at. Those always get thrown in the trash. A 3-week look-ahead could be a couple pages. It's very simple. It's about managing the people in real time. It's based on your most recent CPM schedule update. But if you have a copy of the latest CPM, and it's like hundreds of activities, you're asking the people in the field to dig through papers and papers to figure out what they're supposed to be working on, and that just puts you at risk too. So filtering it down to your 3-week look-ahead is a very sound methodology. If you want to give it out to each trade, filter it down to just their activities and the 3-week look-ahead. So it allows people to see what they're supposed to be working on and understand it by just looking at it instead of having to dig through papers. Important rules. This is kind of going through what we just talked about. Use historical data to produce realistic future projections. Use schedule with data, or update the schedule with that data, review and modify. So once you update your schedule, you get your realistic future projections, you see what your future critical path is, what your future end date is, any impacts to the original plan or end date. You review that, and then you modify. And you modify that by talking with people. You talk to them in the field. You have a meeting. You figure out, based on everybody who's involved, particularly the people who are involved in the issues that you've identified as being impacted, you discuss with them mitigation strategies. You put them on notice if they're causing it. And you ask them how they're going to fix it. And you offer ideas. You get everybody to offer ideas. And then you go incorporate that. That's getting everybody on the same page. It's producing a schedule that reflects what everybody's agreed to. And it's like a little huddle. It's just like before a football play, when everybody agrees to the play and then they run out and they run the play. It's just like that. Use feasible logical structures. Don't just delete logic to hide delay. That causes problems. That causes trade stacking. That causes crew spreading. That causes impacts to productivity and ultimately delays. Know the resource pool. When you are updating your schedule, be very certain that you're keeping an eye on how many people you can get to the site. I know I've sat in meetings where people say I can get as many drywall guys as possible. Sometimes that's the case. Then there's room. There's the idea of, can I fit 1 million trade contractors in this room? And if not, then your durations have to reflect that. How many people can I fit, and how many people can I get in a given space, and how many activities can I be running simultaneously if you're trying to keep up with a schedule? And you need to get your logic to reflect that as well. Trade stacking and crew spreading. I would say crew spreading more than anything causes inefficiencies. Trade stacking as well. If you try to jam too many people in an area, this is going to cause inefficiency issues. And then the last and most important thing is, throughout this process, I think it's very important to talk to your stakeholders and to be honest and transparent. Understand the issues, discuss the issues, discuss your mitigation strategies, give an accurate depiction of the schedule. Don't hide anything. I think, at the end of the day, that just causes headaches for everybody, and it could affect relationships in construction. When you get to the 60 to 70% complete place, and then you drop a bomb that says, oh, by the way, our schedule doesn't work. We've been updating it poorly for the last year, and as a matter of fact, we're going to be probably a few months late. And by the way, that's going to cost money. That isn't helping anybody. That's causing an argument. That will result in potentially a lawsuit and a lot of losses from somebody's end, and there goes your relationship with that person. So I think, honestly, being transparent is very useful. I've seen it. I've been a part of it. The more honest you are, people are understanding. And if they're not, you just put them on notice. I know that causes rifts, but come on, this is business, and you can't be shooting yourself in the foot because you're scared the owner is going to be mad at you. And I recommend that. And then fear to crash. Don't crash your schedule. I've seen owners crash schedules, and I've seen contractors crash schedules, and this just always causes budget overruns. I have a little case study here, updating the schedule and comparing it to the original plan. This is something that I recommend people do often. Generally speaking, by doing this, you can start to understand delay issues. Here's a original plan that I've updated 1 week. I can see the baseline below it. This is actually in our software, Smart PM and Free CPM. But I can see what our plan is, and I can see what's actually happening. And I can see what the critical path is. Now, this is a very simplified schedule, but just extrapolate it amongst a ton of activities, and you'll be able to see the same thing. But if you push it out a whole month, you're not going to see the impact as it's occurring. You're going to be able to catch things much sooner if you do this on a weekly basis. And weekly basis schedule updates isn't that hard. You just have to set time aside to do it. And as a matter of fact, our product allows people in the field to their daily reports to update the schedule every single day. But here's what you do. You take a look. You see what the plan was. You can see where we're at. Look, we're 2 days late. We can figure out where that manifested. We manifested right here. Something took 2 more days longer. That was the excavation activity. What we now know we're 2 days late. It's only been a week. We can overcome that 2-day delay fairly easily by getting more people out there, by maybe overlapping a few things, and it's not going to cost an arm and a leg if you're looking at it on a regular basis. So what happens the next week? It looks like we are now only a day late. We've brought the schedule in 1 day. We got this activity done on time. We got this one done just a little late, and now we're one day out. Next update, look, we are able to overcome that delay, and the reason we were able to do that is because we were watching it. We were overseeing the plan versus actual. We were seeing where our delays were occurring. We were understanding what's necessary next week to overcome that. And if you do this on a grand scale, obviously there are more discussions that need to happen, but you are learning so much more as you go along. I know that this is a very simple example. Again, we're not done yet. I'm going to talk a little bit about lean. I think we have about 5 more minutes. I can talk a little bit past 2:30. I do have to get on another call shortly, but freecpm.com. Check it out. We just launched this. Sign up. You'll get access to this program. It gives you free access to CPM scheduling. We can bring in some pretty large schedules. One of the benefits of this program is that you can create schedules in it, or you can import them from other programs, which means if you have Microsoft Project on your computer, or Primavera, actually, if you have Primavera and you want everybody else to be able to see the schedule and interact with the schedule, you can put it on this site, and everybody in the field can see it. We have different usability, different permissions. There's schedule administrators. There's people who can submit statuses, status of schedule only. They can't mess with the schedule. They can just say what % complete are we on each activity from the field, from their phones. And then there's ultimately a read-only too. So if you want to show this to your subs and you want them to be able to sort and filter and all that kind of stuff, you can do that here. This is a real. We're very excited about this this product offering that we just rolled out. So I'd recommend everybody go check it out. But at this point, if we have any questions, let me know, or else I'll jump right into a pretty high-level discussion about lean construction. I don't see any questions, so I'll jump in there right now. Lean construction. Generally speaking, the term lean started back in the lean manufacturing system. This is where Toyota ultimately said, hey, I think that we can be a lot more efficient in our manufacturing facility, and more importantly, eliminate waste. Waste of people standing around, waste of inventory sitting in certain areas that's ultimately impacting the ability for things to process or people to move around, increasing costs of inventory storage. The goal is to eliminate waste in terms of time and money and produce as much progress and throughput as possible. And as we all know, these manufacturing industries have brought this down to a science, and now it's time for construction to do the same. Construction is a little bit of a different animal, though. Lean manufacturing, you're building the same thing over and over and over that you know exactly how to build, and you're going to build lots of them, and you have to build lots of them to meet a demand. And through that process, you want to minimize the amount of waiting around, things are waiting, and people wasting time, and machines running when they don't need to. That's how they do it there. And to me, it's a little bit more simpler because construction is different. There's a lot of people. There's different stakeholders who have different, I guess, motives that motivate their profit margins. There's different businesses going on around them, and they're all involved in a project. And then they have tradesmen that are ultimately doing work in a specific order. And little impacts can cause costly errors or can cause budget overruns. And managing through that is a challenge in and of itself. So the goal is to make the people moving through your project and building as synced as possible. We do that through scheduling. But there's other ways around this whole process to minimize waste. But it also relies heavily on, every subcontractor has to be working optimally. Your engineer has to be working optimally. The CM has to be working optimally, and the owner has to be working optimally. To do that, you have to oversee it. You have to ensure that it's happening, and that's really what lean construction is all about. It's about overseeing the progression of work and ensuring that it's effectively utilizing time, space of all the people involved and the actual product. It's making sure that no one's impacting each other, and the only way to do that is to really oversee it and collaborate. You oversee for a short amount of time. This is basically daily and weekly oversight of progress and performance of all trades, and then once you see an impact to anything, whether it's cost or productivity, you identify why it's happening, and then you overcome it through collaboration. And as I said, performance oversight measures are ultimately integral to success. Like lean manufacturing, this focuses on the elimination of waste. Generally speaking, the direct cost of construction obviously comes from the amount of labor, installing a certain amount of material, utilizing equipment. Material, generally speaking, is a somewhat constant, unless there's some sort of market event that causes things to increase, or delays ultimately result in an increase in material costs. But to be effective at lean, it all drills down to labor. Labor is what's necessary to progress work. These laborers use equipment, so how well this labor performs ultimately has an impact on equipment costs. So studying labor is really the largest risk item here, and what you really need to keep an eye on is how is our labor progressing in terms of time, and I guess not just time, but ultimately their productivity, which includes progress. And then the goal here is to minimize your labor costs, because once you minimize your labor costs, you're minimizing your equipment costs, and since your material costs are staying the same, these are your variables that you need to focus on. Examples of waste that we're talking about, there's punch list items, things that didn't get installed correctly. There's waiting, people who are just sitting around waiting for the construction company ahead of them to get out of the way and let them work. Is just costing money. They're just sitting there because every one of these people costs money for every hour, and that's going to increase everybody's budget, ultimately going to be argued probably. Correction, same thing as punch list. Putting inventory in the way of people. I've been on projects where there was piles of glass everywhere, while piles of mechanical equipment too, where both were trying to work, and they're having to step over all their equipment, and this was costing money, lots and lots of money on every single floor, just because there wasn't a discussion about whose materials should go where. It was just thrown throughout the entire site, so inventory being in the way. Transportation of materials is another issue, getting them to the site. Once they're on the site, where do they go? Same with material handling and the movement of materials. So, all these little things can impact construction cost. And then there's just poor productivity. People that aren't working as quickly, or they're working many extra hours, which is impacting their progress and performance. So what is lean planning, and what's the difference? This is a question that someone asked before. CPM scheduling is decent, and it's hypothetical. It's a look at the future based on what you know, either at the beginning of the job, what your experience told you, discussions with various people who tell you about trade flow and how it should go. But it's really hypothetical. All you're really doing is focusing on the future based on what you know now. Lean planning is a little bit more oversight. This is talking to people about what's impacting them yesterday or what's impacting them this week. We see that you are not producing as much as you said you would in accordance with our plan. Figuring out why it's happening and overcoming those issues is really what Lean is all about. And that's done through collaboration. Beginning of the week, people sit down, they talk about, how much progress are they going to make this week. They look at their 3-week look ahead. They use pull planning methodologies. And then towards the end of the week, or every single day, they discuss through a huddle of what happened yesterday, where are we getting tomorrow, and you're actually really studying day by day whether things were getting accomplished in accordance with what people said, and if they aren't, you are having discussions and overcoming those obstacles throughout time. And this goes to what we talked about before, is collaborating. People need to know what's going on, and people need to know what they're being impacted on at a real close level to really truly be able to manage through it. The whole monthly update thing, to me, makes it very hard. If I'm given, 100 people, 1,000 people are given instructions for what they're going to be doing the next month and in what order, and I send them off, and then I come back a month later and I said, hey, guys, we're delayed. What happened? No one knows the intricacies of really what happened. There could be a lot of finger pointing, and there's some pretty broad issues. Lean allows you to really drill down via daily huddles and weekly meetings about what happened, what impacted us, how are we going to overcome it, and what's going to happen next week. And then you get scored on it. So understanding the impacts and why they're occurring is pretty much imperative, but there's a whole scoring process that comes along with this. Once you get through this scoring process, you can start to assess what are the breakdowns here, things that you need to really work on. Owner decision. This particular one says engineering's causing a large bunch of problems. Owners are causing a large bunch of problems. Coordination is causing problems. So this comes from 3 different people. Coordination by the construction manager and the subs. Engineering's impacting us, and owner decisions are impacting us. And if you see this over time, and weather too, you can begin to start discussing with the people involved, what are we going to do to overcome this? If you don't do this, you don't know, and at the end of the day, you have a fight on your hands, particularly if you're significantly delayed or over budget. And what I see with a lot of people these days is sometimes they just kind of walk away, shaking their head and kind of upset at how much money they lost because they didn't take the time throughout the project to overcome impacts and issues. And that's really what lean management is all about. Site planning, we talked about this briefly. Here's just an example that I pulled off the internet of, coming up with a place where materials need to reside that is kind of out of the way from everybody else, and thinking about that can cut costs. These team meetings, these daily huddles, it just keeps everybody on the same page, and you have these pull planning sticky tabs on the wall which tell you what you're going to get done in the next 3 weeks. Lean supply through prefabrication is one way of decreasing costs. Getting things delivered to the site, put together already, ultimately will lower costs. I've seen times on projects recently where they just didn't have space to lay out all the steel, which impacted concrete, and concrete lost a lot of money, steel lost a lot of money, and then that ultimately sent the project into a delay situation where all follow-on trades were losing money just because of the space constraint that was not thought of. If you put things together and you deliver them to the site in a lean fashion, just-in-time delivery can help too. It's about keeping the space clear. It's about getting things just when you need them. And the only way to do that is through a schedule, by the way. And the only way of doing that is letting the people who are fabricating this stuff know when things need to be delivered that aligns with the point in time where it's going to be installed. And that takes a lot of studying and analyzing. But when you do that, you minimize cost. And that's the goal here. But that's essentially it, guys. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. I hope I was able to teach you a thing or two. Like I said before, if anybody has any further questions, feel free to ask or email me your questions or call. This is all my contact information. We have upcoming courses every week. Next week will be data management. This is really aligning with Lean. You know, how do we manage data? How do we study it? What data do we collect? What do we do with that data? How do we get better at managing based on what we've learned? After that, we have something on delay analysis, and then we have something on construction claims. I urge everybody here to look at our website. You know, we do a lot of different things over here. We've got some pretty cool technology. We do some consulting work that kind of takes these things to a different level, data management, schedule analysis, schedule generation. I urge you to look at freecpm.com. I urge you to learn a little bit more about SmartPM, and I definitely urge you to give me a call or shoot me an email if you have any questions. I'm going to send this out, the slides out, and I will, once I get this thing loaded, I will send out a YouTube link for this this presentation. But again, thank you very much. Oh, one more thing, if you don't mind, giving me a little bit of a survey. Fill out the survey. Let me know what you thought. If there's anything I can improve upon, I'd appreciate that. If you thought I was the best presenter ever, please tell me. And hopefully I'll hear from you guys soon. Thanks again, and have a great day.